Welcome to the Talk Pod, your daily English learning friend.
Okay, real question before we even say hello. What if everything you were ever taught about focus, the discipline, the willpower, the just push through it advice, what if all of that was completely fundamentally wrong?
I mean, that's a bold way to open a Monday morning.
It's the only way to open this episode, honestly, because what we're about to get into today flipped my entire understanding of how the brain actually works when it comes to getting things done.
And I'll be honest with our listeners, when David first brought this topic to me, I rolled my eyes a little because productivity hacks, we've all heard that phrase so many times it almost doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right, it's become white noise. But stay with us, because this isn't about downloading another app or waking up at 5 in the morning just to suffer quietly.
The suffering in silence approach. Classic.
Classic and useless. What we're actually talking about today is closer to brain architecture. It's about understanding how focus actually gets created and then deliberately building the conditions for it, not forcing it, not white-knuckling it.
And before we get into the meat of this, hey everyone, I'm Sarah, and this is Focus Unlocked, where we dig into the psychology behind high performance, human behavior, and honestly, just figuring out how to get through the day without feeling completely scattered.
I'm David, and today's conversation honestly came out of a rabbit hole I went down after listening to a segment on the Iced Over podcast, where the host made this point that stuck with me for weeks. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the most productive people in the world don't rely on discipline the way the rest of us do. They've essentially found ways to trick their own brains into performing at a higher level.
And that sounds almost too convenient when you say it out loud, right? Like, oh, tricks, great, another shortcut.
It does, but here's the thing. When you actually look at the neuroscience behind what he was describing, it stops sounding like a shortcut and starts sounding like engineering. And that's a very different conversation.
Okay, I want to go back to something you said, though. You said the most productive people don't rely on discipline the way we typically think about it. Can you unpack that a little? Because I think most people, including me before this conversation, genuinely believed that the difference between productive people and everyone else is just that they have more self-control.
Yeah, and that belief is actually doing a lot of damage. Because if you believe focus is purely about willpower, then every time you get distracted or lose your train of thought or can't seem to start a task, you blame yourself. You think, I'm lazy, I'm weak, I just need to try harder. And then you try harder, you exhaust yourself, and nothing changes.
The guilt spiral. I know that spiral personally.
We all do. But what the research tells us, and what some genuinely exceptional performers have demonstrated through their own lives, is that focus isn't a muscle you build through grinding. It's more like a channel you clear. And the way you clear it is by being really intentional about what you remove from your life, not just what you add.
Okay, that's interesting. Say more about that.
So imagine your mental bandwidth as water flowing through a pipe. Most people are trying to force more water through the same pipe. They're reading productivity books, adding habits, adding routines, adding goals. More, more, more. But the pipe is still full of debris. Old commitments, energy-draining relationships, decisions you keep remaking every single day because you never actually decided. That debris is the real problem.
So before you can focus better, you have to first figure out what to stop doing.
Exactly. And this is something that the highest performing people seem to understand almost intuitively. You look at the most successful entrepreneurs, the most prolific creatives, the elite athletes. They're not doing more than everyone else. They're doing dramatically less. But the things they are doing, they're doing with a level of presence and intensity that most people never experience.
I want to bring up something here because I've seen this play out in interviews and conversations with founders especially. There's this idea that success is additive, like you collect skills and habits and relationships and opportunities, and that's how you grow. But a lot of really accomplished people, when they reflect honestly on how they got to where they are, they talk more about the things they walked away from.
Which is deeply counterintuitive and kind of hard to hear, honestly.
Because we're wired to want more options, not fewer. Keeping options open feels like safety.
But here's the thing. Every open option is a small tax on your attention. Every maybe someday commitment, every low-priority task you're holding on to because it might matter, every relationship you're maintaining out of obligation rather than genuine connection, all of that is quietly running in the background, draining the system.
Like apps running in the background on your phone and you wonder why the battery dies so fast.
Perfect analogy. And when you close those apps, when you actually decide what goes on your not doing this list, the phone runs better. Not because you added anything, because you removed something.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Because I think people can understand the concept, but then freeze when they try to apply it.
Yeah, the application is where it gets real. And there are a few categories that consistently come up. The first is low-value tasks, the things that technically get done, sure, but they don't move anything meaningful forward. The administrative work you can delegate or automate, the meetings that could have been messages, the back-and-forth conversations that eat up 40 minutes but produce zero clarity, that stuff has to go.
And there's a level of discomfort in that because a lot of those low-value tasks are easier than the high-value ones, so they become a kind of procrastination with extra steps.
Right. You're productive on the surface, but you're avoiding the thing that actually matters. You're organizing your email instead of making the hard phone call. You're redesigning the deck instead of having the difficult conversation with your team.
And the second category?
The habits and patterns that quietly pull you backward. These are trickier because they're often comfortable. They might be social habits, always saying yes when friends invite you somewhere, even though you know you'll spend the next day in recovery mode. They might be scrolling behavior at night that's destroying your sleep, and you know it, but you haven't made a firm decision yet. Or even just small things, hitting snooze repeatedly, starting your day already behind, already in a reactive posture before you've even had coffee.
The snooze button thing is such a good example because it seems so minor. It's like 10 minutes. But the research on this is actually pretty wild. Hitting snooze interrupts your sleep cycle right at the point where your brain is trying to consolidate the night's work. So you wake up feeling worse than if you'd just gotten up when the alarm first went off.
And it sets a tone. You've already negotiated with yourself and lost before you've even left the bed.
Okay, I want to pause here because we've been talking about subtraction, removing things, and that's half of the picture. But now I want to get into the other side, which is how do you actually build the conditions for deep focus? Because you can clear the runway all you want, but at some point, the plane has to take off.
Yes, and this is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because once you've done the subtraction work, the question becomes, how do you get into the focused state reliably, not waiting for it to show up randomly, not depending on motivation, which is famously unreliable?
Motivation is such a liar.
The biggest liar. You cannot build a life on motivation, but you can build one on systems. And one of the most powerful systems I've come across is the idea of what you might call focus triggers, environmental and behavioral cues that signal to your brain, okay, we're going into deep work now.
I love this because it's essentially using conditioning in your favor. Your brain already responds to environmental cues all the time. You walk into a coffee shop and you feel ready to work. You get into bed and you feel sleepy. You hear a certain song and you're transported back to a specific moment in your life. The brain is constantly reading context.
And most people have accidentally trained their brains with terrible context associations. You sit on your couch, same couch where you watch Netflix, scroll your phone, nap, eat snacks, and you expect your brain to suddenly go into analytical mode because you opened your laptop. And it's like, buddy, we don't do that here. This is the napping couch.
Ha! The napping couch cannot also be the writing couch.
Exactly. So you can flip this deliberately. A specific chair you only use for deep work. A playlist that only plays when you're in focus mode. A scent, even. There's real research on olfactory memory and cognitive state. Your morning ritual before you sit down to work. Not because rituals are magical, but because consistent rituals train your brain to recognize what's coming next.
And this connects to something athletes talk about a lot, pre-performance routines. Before a major competition, elite athletes don't just show up and wing it mentally. They have a sequence, a warm-up, a visualization practice, specific music, specific physical movements, and that sequence is a ramp that gets their nervous system ready.
And the interesting thing is, it works even when the emotional state isn't there. Even if you don't feel motivated, don't feel inspired, don't feel ready, you go through the sequence and the brain follows. The state follows the behavior, not the other way around.
Which is kind of liberating when you think about it, because if you're waiting to feel ready, you're giving your emotional state veto power over everything.
And your emotional state is heavily influenced by things outside your control. How you slept, what news you read, what your commute was like. You cannot hand the keys over to that.
Okay, I want to pivot to something that sounds almost counterproductive, but I think is one of the most underrated productivity insights I've come across. And it's this idea of starting with the hardest thing first.
This one genuinely surprised me when I first sat with it, because so much conventional productivity advice is the opposite. Build momentum with easy wins, let yourself warm up, reduce friction early in the day.
And there is some logic to that in certain contexts, but I think there's a real danger in using easy wins as a way to feel productive without actually doing the thing that matters.
It's like eating dessert first. You get the dopamine hit, you feel good, but you've now filled yourself up with sugar, and the real meal is sitting there getting cold, and you've kind of lost your appetite.
And the real meal, the genuinely important, difficult, meaningful work, that tends to be the thing that requires your best cognitive resources, which are finite. They deplete throughout the day, so if you spend the morning on small stuff, you arrive at the big thing already partly spent.
There's a version of this I think about a lot, which is the idea of the one keystone task. The single thing that if you do it first and do it well, creates a kind of structural momentum for everything else. It's different for everyone. For a business owner, it might be the one client conversation or piece of creative work that drives everything downstream. For someone focused on health, it might be the workout, but there's always one thing.
And the discipline, the real discipline, isn't about forcing yourself to do hard things. It's about resisting the pull toward comfortable busyness long enough to do the one hard thing that actually matters.
And then protecting the time to do it, which brings up something I think we don't talk about honestly enough, the idea of being genuinely hard to reach.
Oh, this is such a nerve toucher for people.
Because we've built a culture that equates responsiveness with professionalism. If you reply to an email in 40 minutes, you're somehow less committed than the person who replies in 4 minutes, and it's totally backwards.
It rewards reactivity over thoughtfulness. The fastest reply wins regardless of whether the reply is any good.
And what that means in practice is that most people's entire days are shaped by other people's priorities. Your inbox, as someone once brilliantly put it, is nothing more than a public to-do list written by people who have their own interests in mind, not yours.
And it sits there, loading the minute you wake up, waiting to fill every available mental space with other people's urgencies.
So the question becomes, how do you be present and accessible in your professional life while also protecting the deep, uninterrupted time that real work requires? And the answer involves some things that feel socially uncomfortable at first, but get easier.
Like turning off notifications.
All of them. Not most. All. The research on this is unambiguous. Every notification, even the ones you don't consciously respond to, creates a micro-interruption in your attention, and recovery from that interruption takes far longer than the interruption itself. Some studies suggest upward of 20 minutes to fully regain the depth of focus you had before you were pulled away.
20 minutes for a notification you glanced at for 3 seconds.
And you might get 10, 15, 20 of those in an hour. The math is devastating.
So how do people handle the social contract of it? Like, people expect you to be reachable.
You set the expectation and then you honor it. You decide when you respond to messages, maybe twice a day, maybe once, maybe a specific window in the afternoon, and you do it consistently and reliably. People adapt incredibly quickly when they know what to expect. The anxiety around availability mostly comes from unpredictability, not from actual delay.
I tested this personally, by the way. I went dark on messages until noon for 2 weeks, and I expected pushback. I expected people to feel like I was ignoring them, and honestly, almost no one said anything because by noon I had responded and everything was fine.
Because most urgent things aren't actually urgent. They just feel urgent in the moment. And giving yourself space to determine what's actually urgent versus what just arrived with urgency energy, that's a real skill. Okay, I want to talk about something that sounds harsh, but is actually one of the most compassionate things you can do for your own productivity, and that's manufacturing pressure.
Artificial deadlines. I have feelings about this.
Tell me.
Because, on one hand, I understand the logic completely. Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time available. Give yourself a week to do something that could be done in 2 hours, and somehow it takes the whole week. That's real.
Objectively real.
But I've also seen people use fake urgency as a kind of anxiety engine. They create artificial pressure and then live in a permanent state of low-level panic and call it productivity.
That's a fair distinction. I think the difference is whether the pressure is tied to something meaningful. There's a version of deadline setting that's basically self-torture, and then there's a version where you're using time constraints to force clarity and prioritization, because constraints do something important cognitively. They narrow the field. They make decisions easier. When you have infinite time, you have infinite options, and infinite options create paralysis.
Analysis paralysis. I feel that.
But when you say, I have 90 minutes to produce a first draft of this, your brain actually operates differently. It starts filtering for what matters, cutting what doesn't, moving faster because the situation demands it.
And there's the other side of this, which is raising the stakes, not just tightening the timeline, but making the cost of not doing the thing real.
And this is psychologically fascinating because we're loss-averse by nature. We work harder to avoid losing something than we do to gain something of equal value. So if you can make non-completion genuinely costly, not just disappointing, but actually costly, you tap into a motivational layer that most productivity systems never touch.
The classic example is telling someone you'll donate to an organization you dislike if you don't hit your goal by a certain date.
I love that one. It works because the loss is real, it's specific, and it's embarrassing. All three.
Okay, let's talk about something that feels completely unrelated to productivity, but is maybe the most underrated piece of all of this: managing your information environment.
The algorithm conversation.
Yes, because here's the thing. We're living inside systems that were explicitly designed by some of the smartest engineers and psychologists in the world to capture and hold our attention as long as possible. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a business model.
And those systems are extraordinarily good at what they do. They run A/B tests on the color of the notification dot. They test which phrasing in a push notification generates the most re-engagement. They're optimizing for your return at a level of sophistication that most people genuinely don't appreciate.
So the question isn't whether these systems are influencing you. They are. The question is whether you're influencing them back.
And you can. Your feed is trainable. Every interaction is data. What you search, what you linger on, what you engage with, what you share, all of it is input that shapes what gets served to you next.
So if you deliberately interact with content that genuinely serves your growth, your professional development, your creative interests, your health, whatever matters to you, you're essentially hiring the algorithm as a research assistant.
Versus letting it be a slot machine that's rigged to keep you pulling the lever.
Which is what most people's feeds are, honestly, and they wonder why they feel mentally foggy after 30 minutes of scrolling.
The cognitive residue from consuming emotionally activating low-value content is real. It doesn't just take up your time in the moment, it stays in your brain, it colors your mood, it shapes what you think about for the rest of the day.
So curation is a productivity strategy, being really intentional about unfollowing accounts that consistently make you feel worse, muting content that doesn't serve you. That's not antisocial, that's protective.
And then taking it a step further, actually teaching and sharing what you learn, rather than just passively consuming it. Because there's a well-documented difference in retention and understanding between reading something and having to explain it to someone else. When you know you're going to share something, you engage with it differently.
Your brain starts looking for connections, implications, applications. It goes deeper by default.
All right, I want to get into something that I know will resonate with a lot of people because I get asked about it constantly. How to actually structure a week so it doesn't feel like a pile of tasks you're perpetually behind on.
The overwhelm question, the I have 17 things on my list and no idea where to start feeling.
Which is almost universal, by the way. People at every level of success feel this. Having a longer to-do list doesn't become less stressful when your title gets bigger. If anything, the list grows faster than your capacity to manage it.
So the first principle here, and I think this is the one most people skip, is starting with what you might call the immovable anchors, the things that are so fundamental to your functioning that they're not negotiable, they're not optional, they're not if I have time.
The workouts, the family commitments, the deep work blocks, the relationships that genuinely recharge you. Get those in first in permanent slots before anything else gets scheduled around them.
Because if you leave those for a later or once everything else is handled, they never happen. Everything else expands to fill the space.
And the second principle is theming your days. Rather than context switching between wildly different types of work all day, creative in the morning, then admin, then meetings, then creative again, then financial planning, you group similar work together by day.
This is something I resisted for a long time because my schedule felt too unpredictable to theme. But once I actually tried it, the difference in my cognitive performance was noticeable, like genuinely noticeable within the first week.
Because context switching has a real cost. Your brain doesn't just snap instantly from one mode to another. There's a warm-up period, a settling in. When you're doing different types of tasks all day, you're constantly paying that warm-up tax without ever actually getting deep into any single mode.
Whereas if you've got a day that's entirely about strategy, or entirely about creating, or entirely about connecting with your team, your brain settles into that mode and then runs efficiently within it.
And then the third piece, and this is so practical but so often overlooked, is matching your schedule to your energy, not just your time.
Because not all hours are equal. Your cognitive resources are not distributed evenly across the day.
For most people, the highest order thinking happens in a window, usually morning for early risers, but it varies. And then there are lower energy windows where administrative or routine work fits naturally. When you figure out your own pattern and then protect the high energy windows for your most demanding work, the output improvement is dramatic.
And yet, most people spend their high-energy windows in their inbox and their low-energy windows staring at a blank document, wondering why they can't think.
Backwards, completely backwards. And fixing it doesn't require more time, it just requires rearranging what goes where.
Okay, I want to talk about something that I think is genuinely undervalued in most conversations about productivity: making your progress visible.
The gamification angle.
And I know that word gets overused, but stay with me because there's real psychology here. Think about why video games are designed the way they are. You get feedback constantly. You see your character get stronger. You get visual markers of progress, levels, achievements, experience bars. Your brain releases dopamine not just at the final win, but at each incremental milestone along the way.
Which keeps you engaged through the hard parts because you can see the progress even when the end goal still feels distant.
And in real life, most people are trying to pursue goals with almost zero visible feedback. You're 6 weeks into a fitness program, you haven't hit your goal yet, you don't look the way you want to look yet. From the outside, nothing seems to have changed. But if you could see that you've worked out 42 days in a row, that your resting heart rate has dropped 8 points, that your sleep scores have improved, you'd feel completely different about where you are.
Progress is intrinsically motivating. It's not that people lack the desire to improve. It's that without visible feedback, the brain can't distinguish between nothing is working and this is working, but the results aren't visible yet.
So you create visibility. Streak tracking, milestone markers, visual boards, whatever makes the incremental progress undeniable and visible to your brain in real time.
And the social piece here is massive. When you're working towards something alongside other people, a workout partner, a team accountability structure, a friend with the same goal, the commitment becomes multidimensional. You're not just accountable to yourself. And most people are much more likely to show up for someone else than they are to show up purely for themselves.
There's something both humbling and useful about that truth.
I mean, use it. If it gets you there, use it.
Okay, energy. I want to talk about energy because I think this is the piece that gets treated as either completely obvious or somehow separate from productivity, when actually it's the foundation everything else is built on.
Without energy, every other system fails. You can have the perfect schedule, the perfect environment, the perfect set of goals. And if you're running on empty, none of it functions.
And energy isn't something that happens to you. That's the part I had to really internalize. It's not like some people just naturally have more of it and others don't. Energy is created. It's a consequence of choices. What you eat, when you sleep, how you move, what you expose your mind to, who you spent your time around.
The human body is remarkably responsive to input. Give it what it needs, and it performs. Don't, and it doesn't. And the signals are usually pretty clear. You just have to be paying attention.
And motion is one of the fastest reset mechanisms available. I've started treating movement not as a workout I do once a day, but as a tool I can use throughout the day to shift states. A 10-minute walk, a few minutes of movement, something that gets the body doing something and breaks the mental loop you're stuck in.
There's a reason some of the most productive people I've heard about do their best thinking while walking. It's not a quirk. Aerobic movement increases blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. It literally changes the chemistry that supports higher-order thinking.
So when you're stuck on a problem, in a mood, in a state of mental fog, the first move is almost always a physical one. Move the body, change the environment. The mind follows.
And then there's the night before energy prep, which doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Your morning doesn't start in the morning. It starts the night before. What you do in the hour before bed determines enormously what's available to you the next day.
Sleep is productivity, full stop. You cannot optimize your way around insufficient sleep. The research on cognitive impairment from sleep deprivation is basically the research on being drunk. Your reaction time, your decision quality, your emotional regulation, your creativity, all of it tanks.
And yet, it's culturally celebrated to undersleep, like it's a badge of commitment.
The hustle culture thing. I'll sleep when I'm dead, which, ironically, you will be faster if you never sleep.
Dark, but accurate.
Okay, I want to end on something personal, and I think it's maybe the most important thing in this entire conversation. And it's this idea of finding your own version of flow, not someone else's.
This is the piece that took me the longest to understand.
Because there's so much advice out there about how to be productive. Morning routines, cold showers, journaling, intermittent fasting, inbox zero. And a lot of it is genuinely useful. But it was designed by someone specific for their specific brain, their specific life, their specific context.
And you're a different brain in a different life.
Exactly, and I think the real work, the deepest layer of all of this, is learning yourself, not optimizing some generic version of productivity, but actually paying attention to when you're at your best, when your thinking feels clear and expansive, when the work feels almost effortless. What preceded those moments? What did the day look like? What did you eat? How did you sleep? Who did you talk to?
And then doing more of that deliberately. Consistently.
And being willing to keep adjusting because you change. What works brilliantly for you right now might not work for you in 2 years. Your circumstances shift, your body changes, the kind of work you're doing changes, the season of life changes.
So the goal isn't to find the perfect system and lock it in forever. It's to stay curious about what your best performance actually looks like and keep iterating toward it.
Which requires a kind of self-compassion, honestly, because the iteration process means sometimes things don't work. Experiments fail. You try something for 3 weeks and it makes no difference. And you have to be able to sit with that without catastrophizing. Take the data and try something else.
Without concluding that you're broken.
Yes, that's the trap. Concluding that because this system didn't work for you, there's something fundamentally wrong with how your brain is wired. And that's almost never the case. It means that system wasn't right for you.
There's something deeply important in that, I think, for anyone who grew up being told that they were unfocused, that they couldn't concentrate, that they were too distractible, too impulsive, too different to fit into the standard modes of working and learning?
Because a lot of the time, those brains just need different conditions. Not medication, not discipline, not more effort. Different conditions.
The environment is the intervention, more than we realize.
And if you can engineer the right environment, remove the friction, add the right triggers, protect your energy, curate your inputs, gamify your progress, raise the stakes in ways that matter to you, your brain will show you what it's actually capable of.
Which is usually quite a bit more than you've been told.
On that note, I think that's genuinely one of the most complete conversations we've had on this topic, and I feel like I could sit here for another 2 hours.
Same. There's so much more to get into, but that gives us plenty to work with.
If something we talked about today landed for you, whether it was the subtraction principle, the focus triggers, the energy-first approach, the algorithm curation piece, take one thing, just one, and put it into practice this week. Not 7 things. 1.
One thing done consistently over time will always outperform 7 things done once.
Always. All right, you know where to find us, and if this conversation added something to your week, pass it along to someone who needs it. That's the whole point.
Until next time.
Take care of yourselves out there.